bath bombs, massage oils, pillow scents, pills. There are seemingly endless ways to use lavender, all of which are supposed to help with things like anxiety and depression. And as a gardener with anxiety, I am very curious as to whether just going outside and sniffing my lavender plant will help me. So today I'm going to break down what we actually know about the science of lavender, what things work and which things are just pseudoscience. So as a drug researcher who's also taught a class on pseudoscience, I was very skeptical of the claims that lavender can actually do anything for anxiety. But what I found actually surprised me, especially like the weird chicken connection that just appeared at the end. But it seems like taking lavender in certain methods actually can decrease your anxiety. So let me tell you about the ones that work and the ones that we just have terrible science on. So first, how does lavender work? It's actually way more complex than you think it is. So lavender contains over 100 components that could contribute to its effects, but we know that there are two for sure that seem to. And these are linalool and linalool acetate. Now, in terms of how they work, let me explain a little bit of the neuroscience here. So basically you have this neuron, and this neuron releases neurotransmitters, and that's how it communicates to other neurons. And you're probably familiar with this idea. So there's like dopamine that seems to be linked to things like reward and attention, and there's serotonin that's linked to things like mood. Now, we have this neurotransmitter called glutamate. So glutamate is basically like this neurotransmitter that tells other things to turn on. And if you have way too much of it, that's when you get some things like seizures. Now, what happens with lavender is that it's basically turning off that neurotransmitter, and it's doing this in a very strange way. So it's not just like blocking the receptor. So it's not just saying like, hey, you can go, but there's no spot for you to turn that key and there's no way for you to turn it on. No, instead, it is actually preventing this neurotransmitter from being sent in the first place. So it's like turning off the on switch by not allowing that on switch to even move. So here's how it does this. So a neuron typically fires, and then that causes that release of those neurotransmitters that go to the next neuron. And so when it fires, it basically sends this electrical signal all the way down to the very end of the neuron, which holds the neurotransmitters there. And when the signal reaches that very end where the neurotransmitters are, it basically causes the specific type of channels, they're called calcium channels. It causes those calcium channels to open, and it allows for calcium to come in and tell those neurotransmitters to go now, you can leave our neuron. So what lavender is doing is it's basically reducing the amount of calcium that's there. It's making that signal less likely to happen, which makes those neurotransmitters less likely to be released, which makes that next excitatory signal less likely to be sent. And that's basically the same thing that gabapentin and pregabalin are doing too. They're basically just saying, nope, we don't need to send any more of those excitatory neurotransmitters. You need to calm down a bit right now. Now, there are also other things that lavender is doing. It's also potentially changing serotonin, all sorts of different effects that we might see. We just haven't studied this as much as we have other drugs because it's lavender. Most people are not doing research on these kind of alternative techniques. But here's the actual science that we do have. So a recent study did a meta-analysis. So it basically looked at like all of the different research that's out there to see what ways of taking lavender work to do things like decrease our anxiety. And fun fact, in the process of writing the study, apparently the author has found some fraud. So there's a nice little section that basically says, yeah, so there are two studies that found the exact same thing by different authors, and we just reported it to the editors and said, you figure this out. It's a big deal nowadays. So anyways, this study did find that there are some ways that you can take lavender that might actually decrease your anxiety. So first, there is this medication called Selexin, not to be confused with another medication called Selexin, which is for prostate relief. Not entirely sure how they both got named the same thing. So you want the lavender Selexin, not the prostate Selexin. And this is actually an over-the-counter drug in Germany that's being used to do things like decrease anxious mood. And what it is it's basically just lavender oil in capsules. Now, side note, this is not the same as you just drinking essential oils. So do not drink lavender essential oils to be like, hey, that person on TikTok told me it was a good way to treat your anxiety. That is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about specific capsules. And they do sell these in stores in the United States. They do sell lavender capsules. Now, the problem here is that our entire supplement industry is unregulated, and there's not really a good regulatory agency making sure that what's in them is correct. So you kind of are on your own when it comes to taking supplements in terms of like, what's actually in them? Is it heavy metals? Is it lavender? You never know. But the lavender capsules do seem to specifically help people who have anxiety symptoms but don't necessarily meet that criteria. So who are anxious but might not have generalized anxiety disorder. And it could work for people with generalized anxiety disorder too, but it typically only works as well as like the low dose anxiety drugs out there. So for somebody with severe anxiety, lavender is probably not going to help much. Now, what about things like essential oils and aromatherapy? So there are quite a few studies that just basically have people like take a cotton ball, put some essential oil on it that smells like lavender, and then have you kind of like huff the cotton ball, or have a diffuser that is basically making the scent of lavender just diffuse around the room. And what we see is that there are a lot of studies that say, yeah, that does do things like decrease heart rate and decrease anxiety. But the problem is that most of these studies are genuinely terrible. First, lavender has a very distinctive smell. So anybody who smells it is going to be like, oh yeah, I'm in the group that's getting lavender, obviously. So that can lead to bias with them saying like, yeah, I feel less anxiety because I smelled some amazing smelling lavender. And there's not really a standardized method of giving lavender. So is it being diffused? How much are you putting on? Is it in a cotton ball? How big of a cotton ball? How long do they have to inhale? And it gets even worse when you start looking at things like massage oils. So there were, I think, about 6 or 7 studies that were looking at whether lavender massage oils can decrease in anxiety. And only one of them actually tested massage oils with the massage versus massage alone without the lavender massage oils. All of the other ones were like, oh yeah, massage with lavender oil does seem to help decrease anxiety. Yeah, because massages are great. And this is the same problem with things like lavender teas. People are like, yes, this lavender tea, if you drink it every morning, it's going to help you decrease anxiety. But there was no control group. So they're just people drinking tea every day and people who are not drinking anything. So maybe it's just the tea. Maybe it has nothing to do with the lavender. So basically, they just reported that most of them were biased. And this is a huge problem because we don't know about things like long-term health effects of using things like lavender essential oils if nobody's doing the research on them. And specifically, if nobody's doing good research on them. Like we know that this might cause things like stomach upset if you're using capsules, or it might cause like an allergic skin reaction if you're actually trying to put it on your skin, but we don't know the long-term effects. And there are some strange problems that we need to be looking into. So for example, there are a few case reports that say that children are actually growing breast tissue, and this includes boys as well as girls. And in doing my research on that, I found that it also increases the likelihood of developing breast tissue in chickens, which is a weird crossover for me as somebody who also has meat birds. So maybe if I just give them lavender in their coop, they will grow more breast tissue, but maybe humans will too, we're not entirely sure. So what we do know is that lavender capsules in particular may work, but the rest of them, we don't know because people are doing some bad science out there. But maybe good science for the chickens.